ahead of Jenny Simpson.
Shelby 354, American record.
World's best, but a new American record for Shelby Houlihan, 14:24.
This is really random, but I think we can go after the 5K world record. And I was just like, yeah, let's do it. You know, like.
Oregon-based track star Shelby Houlihan has been banned from competing for 4 years.
She believes the test result was actually caused by eating a burrito.
We concluded that the most likely explanation was a burrito purchased and consumed.
Shelby Houlihan is either playing 5D Galaxy Brain chess, or this is the dumbest excuse for why someone tested positive for steroids since the dawn of time.
The positive test was for a substance called nandrolone, something that neither Shelby nor I had ever heard of.
If you're an elite athlete and you don't know what nandrolone is, and you're the head of one of the biggest track clubs in the entire United States, and you've never heard of nandrolone, you're pathetic and you're a liar.
I got really kind of suicidal for a while. I've really been focusing on trying to make myself into like this aerobic monster the last 4 years.
Shelby Houlihan was once thought to be the new hero of women's American middle distance running, a successor to previous athletes who pushed events like the mile or 5,000 meters to the point where they were able to represent the US at the highest level humanly possible. However, despite this once-in-a-generation potential Shelby possessed at the height of her career, it would all come crumbling down shortly after. This is not just the story of a banned athlete though. Rather, it's a complete overview of what transpired before, during, and after, which includes some of the most confusing, embarrassing, and frankly annoying scandals to hit the athletic scene in the last 20 years. For those who are a little new here, let's do some catching up. Shelby started competing as a runner just about as early as you possibly could, as in first grade she's documented to have run some mile races in cross country. As the years went on, a 6:34 by 4th grade got her a tremendous head start before her middle school years arrived. While she had made some notable improvements over the next couple years, her 8th grade season was her most expressively talented one by far, running 2:17 in the 800 and placing in the top 5 at the USA Junior Track and Field Championships in her age group. During her high school years at Sioux City East, her freshman year was filled with one win after another, even breaking a course record to gain some serious recognition in the Iowa running scene. With a 3rd place finish at the state cross-country meet, Shelby had a serious grasp on this new environment of competition. But her first official breakout race would be at the prolific Nike Cross Nationals in track, where a 2:07.800 would be an all-time state record to set her up for a monstrous junior year. This didn't translate well at first, but her senior year would start to turn heads very quickly. Not a single girl contested her at the state cross-country championships. Then at the Nike Cross Regionals meet, her 2nd place finish would comfortably grant her a ticket to the national one. She didn't perform as well as she would have liked, but the outdoor track season would tell a much different story, winning 3 state titles for the hat trick, breaking the Iowa state record in the mile, and sending her high school season off by placing 5th and 6th at the USA Junior Nationals in the 8 and 1500. In February of 2011, Shelby signed to Arizona State to compete for Division I cross country and track and field. Now being under the Sun Devil tag, the freshman displayed no fear against veteran collegiate runners the next year, placing top 10 at the Pac-12 conference meet and almost doing the same thing at the regional one as well. Once track came around, Shelby would drop a 2:03 in the 800, a massive personal best. This was a mark that could potentially qualify her for her first D1 national championships, but in the prelim rounds she ran her slowest time yet, a 2:10, and would have to try again next year. Sophomore year, she won her first Pac-12 title, made outdoor nationals, and finished in a respectable 7th place. Junior year would still follow this healthy trajectory Shelby's running had been taken on the whole time, single-digit placements across every cross-country meet she entered, a bronze performance at indoor nationals in the mile. Things were coming into place quite nicely. After qualifying for nationals in the outdoor 1500, she had another legitimate shot at a title. Following a fairly tactical race, and after overtaking Florida's Corey McGee going into the final lap, she would ultimately secure her first ever national title in the NCAA.
Is going to win this race.
for her first NCAA title. And in second place is McGee.
With a national title on her resume, Shelby was sure to get some eyes on her if her future endeavors involved running at the professional level. After a promising senior cross-country season where she'd finish in the top 10 and winning a regional cross-country title, she was later invited to run at one of the most prestigious indoor races around, the Millrose Games Wanamaker Mile. Even though it wasn't her best performance ever, and the fact that she was targeting the NCAA record, she still beat a couple pros and held up reasonably well against some of America's best. Her senior year was unfortunately not a heroic one, as in the indoor mile she would place second to Michigan State's Leo O'Connor, and then during outdoor would place runner-up to Mississippi State's Rhian Wedd-Price. A tough note to end on, but a silver lining would arise once she was recruited to a professional team, and that was the well-established and Nike-sponsored Bowerman Track Club.
2 titles in Des Moines as she takes the 5,000 meters. The final lap, 62.85.
Shelby's entrance into the pro scene didn't yield any immediate results, as while she did make the 1500-meter final at the USA Championships, she got swallowed by the field of elites pretty handily. 2016 seemed to display the same thing until she dropped a massive personal best at the pre-classic, a little over 6 seconds at that. Instead of running the metric mile at the USA Championships though, her coach, Jerry Schumacher, opted to put her in the 5,000. A seemingly unorthodox decision, but she effectively cruised her way into a top 3 spot, making her first world final just a year out of college, and even got a taste of what it was like to compete in an Olympic final, almost finishing as one of the top 10 5K runners in the world. Throughout the next few years, Shelby added USA title after USA title to her resume, whether it was indoor or outdoors, establishing herself as the best middle distance runner in the United States. In 2018, she saw significant improvements to her foot speed, breaking 4 in the 15 on multiple occasions, and even threatening the American record set by Shannon Roberry in 2015. By next year, she wouldn't need to wait any longer to break this record though, as in the 2019 1500-meter final, she would be involved in what was the fastest women's 1500-meter race ever seen, also giving her the best opportunity possible to break the record and to maybe even secure a medal along the way.
Kipyegon takes the silver, Sergey the bronze. Record. Faith Kipyegon, the 11th fastest time ever seen, and a national record for the silver. And Gudaf
354, American record, 4th place.
Yep.
What are the emotions? How are you feeling?
Honestly, very disappointed. It's bittersweet for sure. I kind of came into this year wanting a medal more than anything. I was gonna do everything I could. I feel like I put my head down and trained as hard as I could this year.
When are you going to start training for the Olympics? Are you going to take any time off?
Yeah, I think I'll probably take a couple of weeks off and then get right back into it.
All right, thanks, Shelby.
Despite breaking the American record and running one of the fastest times seen in the last 20 years, 3 other women would also have the race of their lives and would ultimately prevent Shelby from medaling as a result. Shelby's interview hot off of the final had her reflecting on just how bittersweet a race like this really was to her. To break such an iconic record and to run such a time that probably would have won countless other championship events is a brutal pill to swallow. Nevertheless, the Tokyo Olympics were on the horizon, and Shelby was obviously a legitimate contender to bring some hardware home. However, plans to compete at these games would have to be on standby, not just for Shelby, but for everyone else as well. With the Tokyo Olympics being rescheduled to 2021, athletes across the world basically had an extra year to get some training in. Right before this, however, multiple women from the Bowerman Track Club would break the women's American 3K record set in 2007, Shelby being one of them, but her teammate Carissa Schweitzer would be the one to be the official holder. Since they didn't want their fitness to go to waste once the pandemic rolled around, BTC would hold a series of intra-squad meets held in Portland, Oregon. Shelby's first appearance seems to be treated more so as a workout, as she did run a decent 1500 and would also help pace a majority of the 5,000-meter race that would take part not long after. At the second meet in July though, she would do the 5,000 in full, but this time took on the role of trying to break the American record along Schweitzer. Here's how that would ultimately go.
The women's 5,000. So we'll get them to 1,600 on the dot at 4:40. So 5 laps to go, 8:47 says the clock. World's best, but a new American record for Shelby Houlihan this summer, and hopefully we get a chance to see these athletes more. hoping to do that.
14:23.92 would not only break her own American record she set not long ago by over 10 seconds, but was now one of the greatest 5,000 meter performances ever set. By this point, Shelby Houlihan was considered the most promising woman from America to take home a medal in the 5,000 or even the 1,500 if she chose to run that too. At the 4th iteration of the Bowerman Squad Intrameet Series, she took part in a world record attempt in the very unique 4x1,500 meter relay, a record set by Kenya back in 2014. With the help of 3 solid legs by some BTC women, Shelby's 4:03 was the fastest and most clutch leg that would help propel them to becoming official world record holders. All in all, everything looked fantastic. Shelby was in the form of her life, her teammates were in fantastic shape too, and the Olympics were only a year away. Restrictions on the sport would slowly start to release in the following months too,
Shelby Houlihan
allowing professionals from all over the
has been banned from
to mingle and compete with one another once again. And so, let's just her training would go leading up to Tokyo.
Shelby Houlihan is a female track and field Olympian. She breaks records all the time. She got popped for a positive test for nandrolone in December, 6 months ago.
And this headline basically confirmed that Shelby's going to be banned for 4 years.
The next Olympics she'll be able to compete at, I think she'll be 35. So her Olympic dream,
the end of her career,
have been shattered, yeah. Unless it gets overturned.
On June 14th, 2021, Shelby Houlihan would receive a 4-year ban from the Athletics Integrity Unit, or AIU, meaning she would not just miss the Olympic trials and not just the Olympics, but also would miss out on another Olympic cycle as well, meaning her next international competition wouldn't be until 2025, and her next Olympics being in 2028. USA Track and Field had actually cleared her to run at the trials, but this was swiftly met with public outrage and a reversal by the US Olympic Committee, therefore forfeiting Shelby's chances at fulfilling an Olympic dream. For an American distance runner to receive a ban like this was almost unheard of news. The last major ban from a female athlete of this caliber from the US was Mary Decker all the way back in the late 90s, where she'd get popped for testosterone. You could also throw in Regina Jacobs from the early 2000s, where she would test positive for the iconic The Clear substance that was a part of the Balco scandal during that era. Shelby would test positive for nandrolone, a testosterone derivative that provides many advantages for an elite athlete to where it's a relatively common choice in plenty of sports, mainly due to its muscle regeneration capabilities. While the ban itself was tragic for Shelby, her friends, and fans, the eyes quickly shifted away to something even more shocking. And that was Shelby's theory for why she tested positive in the first place. So while she had initially received a ban well before the Olympic trials, Shelby chose to appeal the decision to still race. She and her lawyer, Paul Green, eventually came to the conclusion that the most likely scenario of Shelby excreting a performance-enhancing amount of nandrolone in her urine was from a pork burrito? This excuse was so absurd on the surface that it even caught the attention of outlets that were well outside the traditional realm of running media, and many were quick to ridicule what people were perceiving to be a very, very unlikely reason, where most just concluded that she, well, took exogenous nandrolone, meaning using it in a way that's not naturally produced in her system, either via injection or an oral precursor of some sorts. The Court of Arbitration for Sport, or CAS, also didn't buy it either upon Shelby's appeal to them, but at this moment we don't have any exact details of how they came to their conclusion. We just know their argument wasn't enough and that Shelby was officially handed a 4-year ban. While most had accepted the reality that Shelby took a banned substance, a decent amount of people were quick to defend the American star that she was innocent. Especially her coach, Jerry Schumacher, who delivered a heartfelt speech against what he claimed was basically a political chess match that Shelby fell victim to. This monologue is part of a one-of-a-kind Bowerman Track Club press conference, something we will revisit more in detail later. Now, Shelby still technically had one last option, which was to further appeal it to the Swiss federal courts in the chance that they could get the case overturned in her favor. In the meantime, though, there's a lot we need to unpack beforehand, so the only logical place to start would be, well, the case itself. The CAS decision would eventually go public months after Shelby's sentencing, allowing the public to dissect the information of the case to understand where exactly the committee was coming from in regards to how and why Shelby was banned. The case is 44 pages long, and it primarily hinges on the possibility of whether or not Shelby's burrito was the main culprit of her positive nandrolone test. This will not tackle every single solitary detail of the case, and this case is also just a summary of what actually transpired, but the case summary will be in the description for you to read yourself. In order to deduce whether or not a story lines up, or the data aligns with a certain viewpoint regarding how the banned substance got into the athlete, it is up to the athlete themselves to prove that. The metric the CAS uses to determine if an athlete is guilty or not is done through a concept known as the balance of probabilities. If an athlete's scenario is 49% likely to have happened compared to the opposing party's 51% likely scenario, then the athlete has simply failed to defend themselves and will thus receive the ban. Shelby's team first argues that the test should have been reported as a false positive, since they invoked boar offal as a potential source of endogenous nandrolone, aka nandrolone that occurs naturally in the body as opposed to synthetic or exogenous as we went over before. This is because according to WADA's 2021 technical document for nandrolone, eating non-castrated male pigs can produce urine sample values that make it difficult to determine whether or not the nandrolone came from a doping method or from consuming parts of a wild boar. Therefore, Shelby should not have been immediately charged with an anti-doping rule violation since the labs did not follow proper protocols, and that a pharmacokinetics analysis should have been performed to truly get to the bottom of her test results. However, the opposing party, World Athletics, the governing body for track and field, states that the laboratory simply had no obligation to perform such further analysis, even if part of World Athletics' argument does stem from using the 2019 version of the nandrolone document. The real kicker here is that the word should in their rules regarding a pharmacokinetics analysis doesn't mean they have to perform one if the lab feels like they have more than enough data to suggest otherwise. Not to mention, in Shelby's IRMS results, the difference between her nandrolone levels and other hormones, aka her endogenous reference compounds, exceeded a difference of 3% for her delta 13 value, which means the lab had to report it as an adverse analytical finding, or AAF. Therefore, the laboratory did not take part in any malpractices, and Shelby should have been charged with an anti-doping rule violation, a conclusion the CAS panel agrees with very comfortably. Now, in terms of the burrito shenanigans, one of the first questions that needed to be answered by the panel regarding why her levels in particular were so high in the first place was whether or not Shelby even ate a burrito. The answer here is, well, yeah, probably. While a proper receipt of some sorts was never formally kept or perhaps even received, the text corroborations from the people she was with do support Shelby's words, so the panel finds it likely she did indeed purchase and consume a burrito about 10 hours before her drug test. Now, did the burrito contain pork in it? Shelby's recollection was that while she did order a beef burrito, she noted that it was far more greasy than normal, combined with the fact that it was unlabeled and that the food truck was supposedly busy that day. Overall, the panel does find it possible to some degree that Shelby was handed the wrong burrito, and that the pork burrito in particular is notably greasy from the pictures she submitted. When I mentioned a specific type of pork that can notably increase nandrolone levels, what we are referring to are uncastrated wild boars. Shelby's team argues that these pigs have extremely high levels of nandrolone in them and are even sold and slaughtered in the US every single day according to the US Department of Agriculture. However, since the type of burrito Shelby claims to have received is a pork sausage or chorizo burrito, World Athletics states that these types of boars go through the food chain through completely different areas than pork. The only way this could even be possible is if they're what are called cryptorchids, meaning they're missing one or both of their testes. Not only that, but animal science professor John McClone further states that boar meat not only makes up a very small portion of the US pork market, but again, they're not even present in the same food chain as your average pig meat. This is mainly due to the amount of checkpoints slaughterhouses have that would prevent stuff like this, and the fact that the very existence of cryptorchidism is almost non-existent anyways. Lastly, the plant the food truck buys from doesn't even operate a boar kill plant to begin with, further making it a near impossible chance that any type of cryptorchids could have ended up in the food truck Shelby ate from, let alone from the exact burrito she ate. Houlihan's team's response was that because she ordered her burrito when operations were temporarily shut down due to the pandemic, that this makes McClone's estimation of unlikeliness much less credible. McClone asserts his position firmly, though, that USDA protocols would have stayed virtually unchanged because of this. So overall, the panel finds it technically possible, but improbable that uncastrated boar meat ended up in the burrito Shelby ate. Since the chances are technically not zero up until this point, the panel had to answer questions regarding whether or not cryptorchid pork has very high nandrolone levels to begin with, whether or not it comes up prominently in an athlete's urine, and more, but the experts World Athletics provided consistently outshined what Shelby's team brought to the table, thus not convincing the panel of anything except the fact that she ate a burrito and nothing more. The fact that it couldn't even be confirmed what type of burrito Shelby even ate in the first place seemed to have made her case a wobbly one from the get-go, but there's a couple more things they tried. Shelby's team provided hair samples and a polygraph test, but the panel rejected these since they weren't viewed as substantial or conclusive evidence regarding whether or not Shelby committed an anti-doping rule violation or not. Shelby's team lost the fight pretty convincingly, as she would receive the full 4-year ban, meaning she would miss 2 Olympic cycles and would not be allowed to return to competition until January 2025. Overall, it seems like Shelby's team got frankly walloped on just about every front. You'll see the phrase like possible but improbable used quite often here when they make a decision on each point, but this seems to be more so used as a technical term since Shelby's points can't be 100% refuted. If you read between the lines just a little though, it's clear World Athletics stole the show and the CAS didn't buy almost anything Shelby brought to the table in the end. This case was shocking, confusing. It was unlike any doping case the track and field scene had witnessed in a hot minute, especially since the end result of the appeal was a 4-year suspension. No one knew how to feel about it at first, but once the CAS decision went public and people read more diligently into the burrito excuse, it was damn near unanimous that she deserved the ban. However, there were certain individuals and even companies who were willing to defend or support Shelby without much hesitation. Some were very close to her, while others are completely unknown to this very day. The same day the news came out about her ban, a press conference would be held and published to the Bowerman Track Club YouTube channel. It includes heartfelt messages from Shelby, her coaches, and her lawyer, Paul Green. This is where we'll now transition from a neutral overview of the case and Shelby's career to a more investigative and opinionated piece, highlighting what I find to be the most embarrassing and questionable moments from those involved with Shelby's defense, which includes Shelby herself. Let's start off with this guy.
You'd also have to be an idiot to take Nandrolone as a distance runner because it would never help you. It just makes no sense.
Paul Green is the lawyer that represented Shelby following her ban. He's previously defended people like Jerrion Lawson and Ajay Wilson, both American pro track and field athletes who received major help from Green's defense skills, getting them both off the hook quite well by using contamination-related defenses. But in this press conference, he seems to make quite a few either baseless or just outright incorrect assumptions throughout this meeting, and meticulously words things at times to manipulate the audience to the point where it calls into question a lot of things he's done up until this point.
10 hours before would have been perfect in terms of the timing of the level that was in Shelby's system, which is an extremely low level. So low, in fact, that in my view, it became clear that it was impossible to distinguish where it came from. What are we doing with these parts per billion low-level findings by ruining people's lives instead of just being more circumspect about it and doing an atypical finding, which they could have done, and seeing what was really going on?
First, he states that Shelby's Nandrolone levels were extremely low. This is just patently false. Not only did she test for well over the legal limit, but Green specifically uses this very low number measurement to quantify her urine concentration to make it seem like it's a low amount, but again, we know it's nearly 3 times over the legal amount.
In fact, nobody has ever been caught taking an oral Nandrolone supplement that they could actually identify. 99+% of people who get caught taking Nandrolone are doing it by injection. And the reason is because you have to be an idiot to take oral Nandrolone. It doesn't actually help you at all.
He almost makes a legitimate point stating that there is literature supporting that oral Nandrolone can be far less effective than when injected for elite sports, but quickly loses his own argument when he states that Nandrolone conceptually does nothing for distance runners.
You'd also have to be an idiot to take Nandrolone as a distance runner because it would never help you. It just makes no sense.
Not only does Nandrolone aid greatly in recovery due to its muscle regeneration capabilities, but it can also increase hemoglobin concentration, something that is perfect for an endurance athlete, and when you combine it with other anabolics, it can improve your overall hematology profile quite substantially. If you were wondering why I'm even mentioning the use of other anabolics, it's because if we are under the assumption that Shelby was knowingly taking Nandrolone, anyone involved with anabolics will tell you that it's normally combined with other things, namely testosterone. In short, this is because Nandrolone suppresses natural testosterone production, meaning you're gonna need some things to counteract it. My own aggregation of women's distance running bans also leads me to believe that it's pretty unlikely all of these women were just taking snake oil and not realizing it. And from what I know, none of these women have tried to use a similar argument to Shelby's. Nandrolone is a completely valid choice for hyper-elite performance, including distance running, and Green either doesn't fundamentally understand that, or is just outright lying to your face. Mr. Green is also no stranger to these types of contamination cases. In fact, it's a big part of his shtick. Jerry and Lawson's case with epitrenbolone, there was virtually no science for anyone to counteract most of what Green was throwing at the CAS, since Lawson's team had a good enough contamination alibi. A.J. Wilson's case also used bad beef as an excuse, and to this day is one of the more questionable doping cases US track and field has ever had. Green tried using these cases as legitimate references to how athletes can get wrongfully busted, but I would argue these cases barely proved anything. But hold on, I haven't made my point just yet. Just recently, he represented Issam Asinga, the teenage sprinting phenomenon, who tested positive for GW1516, a modulator that a few athletes by this point have gotten caught with. Unless Asinga miraculously came up with this theory on his own, it was very likely Green who told a council that Asinga's positive test result was the result of contaminated Gatorade gummies, a defense so comically bad that it was laughed about throughout the sprinting world, and obviously didn't end up working. I wonder how their lawsuit against Gatorade is going. Green's approach to anti-doping defenses is not only very one-dimensional, but borders on or is outright asinine. I would also wager it takes advantage of athletes in extremely desperate and vulnerable situations, where their career and livelihoods are on the line, encouraging them to appeal the case as many times as they could, as the financial hardships fester more and more into his bank account. For my money, none of which he'll ever have thankfully, Paul Green is an embarrassment and a representation of how much of a joke the anti-doping legal system truly is. And the next time you see him representing a major US athlete that gets banned, take what he says with an entire container of salt.
In January of this year, I was notified that Shelby had recorded a positive drug test in December of 2020.
Then there's Jerry Schumacher, the head of the Bowerman Track Club. Jerry, who allegedly has been very reserved and media shy, was openly passionate with this speech about Shelby and was understandably upset that one of his prime athletes and friends got popped for a banned substance. However, when Schumacher claimed he had never heard of nandrolone, this is where his words genuinely lost any and all credibility from there on out, and a professional field coach for athletics would give his 2 cents on that statement as well.
The positive test was for a substance called nandrolone, something that neither Shelby nor I had ever heard of.
Here's a big strike, okay? If you're an elite athlete and you don't know what nandrolone is, and you're the head of one of the biggest track clubs in the entire United States and you've never heard of nandrolone, you're pathetic and you're a liar. And there's two cases here. You're either pathetic because you're one of the best distance runners in the entire world, you're one of the best coaches and one of the best track clubs in the entire United States, and you don't know what nandrolone is? You don't know what DECA is? That would be like me not knowing what EPO is. You have to know this stuff. If you have athletes inside of your club that are getting drug tested on a regular basis, which I know that Bowerman's Track Club is, we at Garage Strength have a whole parking spot for USADA. That's how often we're getting drug tested. We know almost every single drug that's illegal based off of WADA and USADA. So if you don't know what nandrolone is, one of the most potent steroids and one of the most popular steroids, you don't know what DECA is, you are a liar.
For a coach that's been involved with professional sports for years, in a sport that has a very well-documented history with doping nevertheless, under a company that has had former teams busted for banned substances, somehow hasn't heard of one of the most efficient and common PEDs in athletics? It's one thing if Shelby didn't know what it was by name, which I don't believe that either, but for a world-level coach to claim to not know what nandrolone is, likely had every coach dying of laughter as Jerry tried to PR weasel his way out of this. If that's not enough, here's some more interesting tidbits from at-the-time athletes of Bowerman and other people adjacent to Shelby.
But with Shelby, I was there 24/7. I know what she was putting in her body. I know because it's an innocent athlete that has to serve a 4-year ban from the sport that she put everything into, that she trusted.
Before, I mean, if I hadn't joined Bowerman, I would say, man, look at NOP. Like, those guys are probably doing something sketch. Like, these guys, there's something wrong. And now I look at Shelby, who is 100% innocent, and obviously people have no idea what what her case is at all, and have these claims about her. Right. I understand if you just knew that, you would be like, all of Bowerman is dirty. None of Bowerman is dirty. It's just like, yeah. But I
say, well, because she just got a 4-year ban for eating what? A nandrolone burrito. I don't even know what that means. And we're not experts, and we didn't read everything. I read the Bowerman post and I read her post. Yeah, so basically 4-year ban for that because They pump a bunch of hormones into the crops, into the food, into the animals that they raise. I am a Shelby Houlihan fan. Love that girl.
Overall, the people who defended Shelby during this time frame definitely had some rough defenses, to put it lightly. Some of it is either meticulously worded or outright inaccurate claims, blatant biases towards Shelby given their close relationship with her. It's just all so disingenuous and very obviously meant to preserve the image of yet another Nike running club who's fallen victim to yet another doping scandal. However, this is just the very beginning of the responses. Things get much, much weirder pretty damn quickly. In July of 2021, a user by the name of Twoggle would create a GitHub repository called Doping Files. While the user page has since been defunct, the article itself still exists and is a very lengthy analysis on why Shelby is more likely innocent than not, often criticizing the methods anti-doping labs and organizations used to ban Shelby in the first place. Now, Twoggle himself will probably try to convince you that it's not a pro-Shelby piece, and we'll see that's not the case quickly. This editorial seems to be a direct response to another article too, created just a couple weeks prior by a man named Keith Moulton, or Moulton K on social media. He created a thread on running message board LetsRun about how the entire Burrito Gate situation is entirely surrounded by corn, I guess? The fact that these two lengthy independent studies coexisted in such a short period of time was bizarre as it was, both of which seem to lean very much in Shelby's favor, but I want to direct the attention towards the Twoggle document since I think it covers a variety of topics, and also later explain why Shelby herself used this as a credible study to put on her own website. To put it bluntly, this editorial, study, or whatever you want to call it, is not good. It cherry picks or misinterprets data, has a great misunderstanding of how nandrolone works in elite sports, and hinges on poor semantics and needlessly hypothetical situations to where it's very obviously a pro-Shelby piece masqueraded as an independent study meant to criticize the anti-doping industry. To start off, the 40% false positive rate is 1, not accurately represented here, and 2, not even relevant here either. It's been established in the CAS case that if any pork were to be in the food truck, it would be commercial US pork, and if it were from a non-castrated pig, this would be incredibly unlikely on top of that. It's no surprise that a couple of the participants had fairly high delta 13 values that would constitute a failed drug test. This is not a false positive, this is simply what would happen if you were to eat this specific type of boar. Next, Twoggle cites a 2008 report that shows insanely high levels of nandrolone found in urine upon eating uncastrated pig organ meat, even as high as 25 times of what Shelby tested positive for. The problem here is that, again, those people were eating straight up organ meat, and the ones that had boar meat not only had way lower amounts of nandrolone in their urine than Shelby, but ate substantially more meat as well. Twoggle also talks about why Shelby wouldn't use nandrolone as a potential performance enhancer, and this is just comically off the wall as well. We've established that it would not only be a reasonable choice for a distance runner, but it's arguably one of the best anabolics you could possibly use. Furthermore, there seems to be not a single mention of the word microdose in this article either. Microdosing has effectively been considered the meta for evading drug tests for decades now, and is why athletes can run phenomenally for years and then poof, they just get caught one day. Just because an athlete can pass dozens of tests doesn't mean their failed one is an outlier. Lastly, the article also cites Shelby's spirocytosis from when she was a child, and that later in life you can develop what's called post-cholecystectomy syndrome, or PCS, upon getting your gallbladder and spleen removed. Not only is there no proof she even suffers from PCS, but she got this surgery from when she was 8 years old, and is effectively past the main time window she would have even been suffering from this anymore if she were to. Lastly, the congruence between Twoggle and Keith Moulton's posts is almost shocking, to be honest. Twoggle's first follower on Twitter is Keith, and is also the first person they follow. Now, before seeing other people's likes were disabled, I did manage to screen cap some pretty similar political beliefs they share as well, but at the time I only highlighted their shared views in the anti-vax department. I still also find it strange just how complimentary and conveniently timed Twoggle's article was just a little over a week after Keith's article came out, and the fact that they're both willing to take their viewpoints to such insane depths almost has me convinced they're the same person. Keith is also a longtime full-stack developer, and GitHub is really the one single place I could think of where a developer would want to store an editorial out of all places. Now, despite these weird coincidences, I still don't think they're the same person, but I'd be lying if I said it wasn't very strange that these hyper-specific viewpoints and passion for this subject coexisted within and without their knowledge of Shelby. After Shelby's failed attempt to get her case appealed, she and her team would appeal this decision to the Swiss federal courts in a last-ditch effort to get her sentence revoked. The problem is that by this point, Shelby has likely accrued quite a bit of money in legal fees, and this appeal would only heighten her financial burdens further. As a result, Shelby's team would launch a website called clearshelby.com. It included the gist of the CAS case, the parts where she felt like she was in the right, and wow, that's strange, 2 independent studies conducted by no other than Twoggle and Keith Moulton. Shelby also even went the lengths to share Twoggle's article on Twitter, despite almost never posting on that site ever. The site also highlights a laundry list of legal fees that she's dealing with, only to then direct you to a GoFundMe page where she is asking for $300,000. Despite some promising success in the early stages of the campaign, it very quickly reached a sticking point and to this day has only raised $16,000. Nevertheless, Shelby would still be pursuing her final appeal attempt and would go to the Swiss courts for one last shot at redemption. Unfortunately for her, this would officially fall flat in May of 2022 and would have to serve her original sentencing until January 2025. This means no professional level racing, no training with others, just pure isolation from the competitive running scene for 4 straight years. Normally, by this point, Shelby would not have much to say or offer, and was completely out of options to appeal her case. Except, we've somehow still only scratched the surface.
I want the sport to be clean. Screw people that decide to cheat other people out of success.
Another middle finger. We got 2 on the show.
Not long after Shelby was handed her ban, a notable number of women had departed from the Bowerman Track Club within a pretty short time frame. Some seem to have had legitimately sound reasons, while others didn't say a whole lot, or in one specific case, did leave specifically because of Schumacher's continual association, and really the rest of Bowerman's association, with Shelby. Once her Swiss appeal got thrown out, Shelby would appear on an episode of the Running Effect podcast. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that the host of this is very obviously pro-Shelby. He actually just admits that eventually, and not at any point does he bring up a single counterpoint to Shelby and just lets her get it all out. But then I pulled back a bit. Not at the podcast host, but Shelby herself. At the time, the person running this show was a junior in high school, aka a kid. For her to not only selectively join this podcast and no other platform, but to use this to just emotionally vent to a kid for over an hour just feels, I don't know, it feels wrong.
I immediately just started crying. I was so shocked and angry and sad. And I think I just sat there and cried for 20 minutes. I'm just like, I don't know what to do. I confided in a couple close people and I was just like, if this doesn't go in my favor, I'm not going to be okay. I don't know what I'm going to do. I can't see a way to move forward from this. I've dealt with depression and anxiety and thoughts of suicide for a lot of my life. That's just something I've struggled with since I was about 14.
Especially since she later used his platform as good press on her Instagram, where it sat very nicely at the top framing her as this innocent, wholesome woman who could do no wrong. From my interpretation, which if you want to say is far-fetched, I get it, I think Shelby used this kid's platform to emotionally grieve to for an hour and a half, used it for good press, and even requested him to turn off comments on the Instagram post when things got even remotely sour. I myself remember commenting on this post, but it didn't take long until it was deleted, and then, well, every comment following that. Since then, they seem to have fostered a consistent friendship, as she's probably the most invited guest on the show, but something just feels really off about this, and I feel like it crosses this very sketchy moral ground in the end. In February of 2022, Shelby seemed to be still training and even did a 5K time trial running 14:47. There's also other time trials she did, like an 800 in under 2:02 and a 1500 in 4:05. In September of 2022, a detailed article of Shelby's current status as a banned athlete gave people great insight into how she was handling everything on her own. Except the more interesting and damning tidbits came from former member of BTC, Gabriella DeBoost-Stafford. Obviously, the ban was one reason DeBoost-Stafford left the team, but apparently Shelby and BTC coaches were doing everything they could to loophole their way to allowing her to train with the team. Something on the surface is very much against WADA's rules when an athlete is serving a suspension. DeBoost-Stafford states that Shelby would drive to where BTC would train multiple times a week and would run with the team, even training together where they temporarily went to Flagstaff for altitude training. Shelby also apparently used the BTC gym, which is located at Schumacher's residence. The loophole is that as long as Shelby bumped into BTC members, that this would apparently just be okay. Unsurprisingly, this was a proposal by likely none other than Mr. Green. DeBoost-Stafford tried getting clarifications on everything that was going on, but apparently was receiving roundabout answers or were shot down quickly. After seeking answers from other anti-doping agencies, they essentially told her that what Shelby and Bowerman were doing were shaky at best and that it would be wise to leave the team and to submit an anonymous statement to the AIU. During this time, Shelby claims in order to generate some income since she isn't contracted by Nike anymore, that she's been doing various food delivery services like DoorDash, and I think with the way Shelby words her training at the end of the article, that DeBoost-Stafford may have actually infiltrated Bowerman's plans to keep Shelby in the training group. So, even after all the lying and misleading statements from her lawyer, her coach, and other people involved, Shelby's team are still willing to try and circumvent the rules as much as possible in order to keep her on the team. It's almost as if they're willing to bend the rules against WADA via training loopholes, that they would be willing to do something as basic and common as microdosing to evade WADA testing as well. A few months before this article was posted, Shelby would actually take part in her first race in years, a local half marathon in Iowa, her home state, that wasn't USATF sanctioned. She would not only win, but had even received a cash prize of $500, which she would donate towards local trail development. This was a local race, but there's something a little off about a banned professional level athlete winning prize money that someone else could have won. It's nice that she donated it, but I don't think she really had an alternative option. And I don't really know why she ran this race in the first place, knowing damn well she was going to win by a ton anyways. She also ran another local 10K race, which of course she won, and then ripped a pretty solid 8K time trial by herself not long after. Just a few weeks before these races, Shelby was given an actual spotlight at the 2023 Beer Mile, where she wasn't allowed to run in the women's championship race, but took part in the men's race, where she would decimate the women's world record running 5:44. This, though, just seems like another example and excuse of blatantly giving good press to a woman who just honestly doesn't deserve it at this point. And they don't try to hide it either with the comments they selectively like too. There's a couple other examples of awkward pro-Shelby pieces that serve no purpose whatsoever, but at this point you're probably wondering, what does she even plan on doing once she's unbanned?
I've really been focusing on trying to make myself into like this aerobic monster the last 4 years.
In November 2024, Shelby spoke to Runner's World that she was more than prepared to take on the world's best at the age of 31, and had since hired a different agent, Paul Doyle, who funnily enough represented Jerry and Lawson at one point. In terms of sponsorships, she said that Bowerman would take her back. Oh, well, I guess that's not happening. Many anticipated her return in excitement or disgust, but just before this, FloTrack, the largest company in track and field, decided to put this out. This is a documentary produced, edited, and without any shame, posted by FloTrack. Real money was spent on making a 30-minute piece about an athlete who failed a drug test, got her case annihilated, and the biggest company in the sport decided to just make a completely biased, feel-bad piece to try and soften the blow for her inevitable return to the sport. Needless to say, this pissed a lot of people off. Like, you have to actively look for a positive comment about this thing. Now, surprisingly, FloTrack opted to not put this behind a paywall like they do with literally everything else. But at the same time, it's kind of telling in a way that they want people to see this so badly that they made this free of charge to watch. I watched it and it's barely a documentary, honestly, as it doesn't really document anything. It's just Shelby and her boyfriend kind of riffing for minutes on end for the most part, and while yes, it is sad that Shelby dealt with legitimately concerning mental health issues to the point where she considered ending her life, that's not something worth ignoring if you have basic human empathy. But at the same time, this perpetual state of mental anguish was greatly heightened at the fault of her own actions. Fun fact, I did manage to cross-reference a few screenshots I took of one of the videographers' Instagram that shot and I believe even edited parts of this documentary. This is from around around July 2022, and this is from around November 2022. So this thing was a long work in progress, and FloTrack was on board with Shelby, even near the height of the public's disdain for her. So it was very clear from the start they wanted to welcome her back to the sport with open arms, despite 99% of the running community shunning her. Oh, never mind, they just put out another piece on her. Like you can't make this up. Anyways, Shelby's return to racing was actually quite victorious on arrival. She ran a solid opening indoor 3K in Arkansas, ran 4:20 in the mile to log the #2 all-time mark in the event, and as of recording this, made the world indoor team in the 3K, finishing just behind Nikki Hiltz. And that's pretty much all I have. But hold on, I feel like we're forgetting someone. Yeah, they're getting another dedicated bonus section in a video, but it's far from positive this time around. Whether you think LetsRun is a legitimate source of running news, a cesspool of degenerate run cells delivering the worst takes conceivably possible, or an interesting combination of the two, there's one thing the staff over there has made very clear, and that's that they think Shelby is very likely innocent, and some of them have gone to really bizarre lengths to defend that. The LetsRun community in general also just loves talking about Shelby, for better but for mostly worse. In fact, as a proof of concept, I decided to make a test thread about the GoFundMe finally closing, and managed to get it trending within a couple hours. The first red flag, which only to a small extent because it does help now with a bit of hindsight, is that following Shelby's ban, the first LetsRun staff opinion piece was written by Jonathan Galt in June of 2021, calling the 4-year suspension a track and field tragedy. This was written months before the CAS decision became public, so I'm not going to harp on it too much here. He attributes his reasoning for defending Shelby due to his relationship with Schumacher, which in turn makes him more inclined to believe what Shelby and company said during the Bowerman press conference. It's strange because Jonathan seems to be self-aware of his own bias, as he entertains what is a more logical viewpoint, but just can't bring himself to admit that it's the more likely scenario. I'm not certain where he stands nowadays, but I'm gonna give him a slight pass because Jonathan Galt is far beyond the most competent member of the LetsRun team, and this was again written before any concrete info came out. I can't say the same for this guy though. This is Robert Johnson, aka Rojo?
Is it pronounced Wajo or Wejo anyway? You should clarify that shit.
We're gonna say Rojo, it's just more fun that way. AKA one half of the Brojos that founded the long-standing running message board that you all know as LetsRun. Over the last 20 years, Robert's gained a sizable following. His journalistic style is kinda bizarre. It's aggressive, but pretty awkward.
Recent years, there's been a number of doping positives in Kenya. What would you say to someone who says, when they see 209.56, just says, this is too good to be true? I have questions about it.
Or in some cases, it can borderline be unnecessary.
I also think that you should drug test Christian Coleman every single day for the next year. I would do it for the rest of his career. We need to crowdfund this. Every day, drug test this guy for the rest of his career.
Robert also takes part in his own message board quite a bit, where he interacts with the anonymous and registered users of the site, and has a very interesting history of posts to say the least. Like Galt, Robert was very much on Shelby's side, but to a much greater extent. Just weeks after the ban was announced, a thread was made about how teammates of BTC gave a shout out to Shelby following their Olympic qualifications. Okay, fine. However, out of completely left field, Robert felt obligated to compare Shelby's ban to the to the George Floyd case. I genuinely don't know how detached you need to be from reality to make that comparison, let alone that it's coming from the owner of one of the most popular running media outlets in the sport. I don't know. I don't have anything for this one. Weldon, Robert's brother, also quickly fell in love with Twoggle's article, likely because of how pro Shelby it was. The LetsRun Twitter also still follows Twoggle to this day as part of their fairly limited selection of people to follow. If that's not weird enough, guess who won the LetsRun 2023 World's Prediction Contest? You guessed it, Twoggle. Now, this on its own is likely just a pure coincidence, but why did the LetsRun team feel the need to do an entirely separate Q&A section about the Shelby case with this person 2 years after the ban with someone who doesn't even have a proper grasp on the case in the first place? It's so out there and unnecessary and just reinforces this very confusing relationship LetsRun has with this person. During this time, they did get sports scientist Ross Tucker to do a full breakdown of the CAS case, where the conclusion was very against Shelby's defense. You would think it eliminates most of their biases. Except, the way this interview is framed is almost like LetsRun was more concerned about trying to hold on to that sliver of hope that Shelby may be innocent as opposed to just a methodical, honest breakdown of the situation with no inherent bias whatsoever. I think this post sums it up quite well. But then we have this. In March of 2022, LetsRun released a few new shirts to add to their merch site. One was a Tin Mom Elite shirt, a reference to Drew Hunter's mom who was the coach over there, and the other was a Burrito Track Club shirt, a play on the Bowerman Track Club name and the burrito situation. Honestly, the novelty of this shirt could be a lot worse. It's tongue-in-cheek, it's not the worst design ever, but if you wear this at a non-running event, you're gonna get a lot of confused stares. But wait a minute, 100% of the profits will be donated to Shelby? I'm sorry, what? In the original thread, there was no elaboration, and many expressed concerns with buying the shirt if money would be donated to Shelby's legal defense fund, but we did eventually get an answer in May of 2023 when he did a last-minute sale for the shirts. Not only does Robert's reasoning here make 0 sense, but he was completely dunked on by his own community for it too. Despite how awful of a decision this is, I wanted to actually confirm whether or not Shelby ever received the money from the Burrito Track Club shirts, because as far as I was concerned, there was no proof. Now, Shelby herself is virtually impossible to get a hold of unless you're a very specific outlet, and she hasn't responded to me to this day about it, so I sent an email to the LetsRun team. After 2 emails, Robert Johnson eventually responded, telling me that he would be counting up the shirts and calculating how much money to send to Shelby. The result was around 100 shirts at a profit of $16 to $18, meaning around $1,700 would be sent to her agent, who at the time was likely Stephen Haas. I have also sent him a message on Instagram and he has yet to respond. Robert said that the money would be sent around National Burrito Day the following year, which is in early April, so I waited until then to see if anything would happen. Burrito Day went by, so I sent a follow-up email on May 6th, 2023. I didn't receive a response, but strangely enough, 3 days later, a thread was created by Robert where the Burrito Track Club shirts would go on a flash sale, but no word of the money being sent ever made its way. So as a final attempt to get an actual answer of if the money was donated, I tuned into a live stream where Robert and Jonathan wrapped up day 1 of the USA Indoor Championships. This was Robert's response to my inquiry.
Someone wants to know, Runner Boy wants to know, hey, did you ever send her the shirts? The profit. I actually did send her the check earlier in the year, or last year, I guess. And, I asked Weldon, hey, did she ever cash it? And she's like, yes, she did. And then I didn't know this until yesterday or today. John's like, yeah, she actually sent me a text message saying, hey, thanks for the note. I wrote a very simple note. I said something like, I hope you're clean. And then I said on the podcast what it was before, like, I hope you're clean. If you are, good luck coming back, or something like that. I don't know. It's pretty basic. Like, I acknowledge that we don't know the truth. Only she knows the truth. So anyways.
So the money was allegedly sent, the check was allegedly cashed, but again, no proof. I sent another email for further confirmation, but as of writing this, have not received a response. Now, some of you might be wondering why I'm even so hung up on this specific thing in the first place. Wouldn't I not want the money to be donated? Of course. But here's the thing. Selling merchandise with the intention of donating profits and then not doing that very thing, or providing confirmation you donated said money, is pretty unethical in principle. Also, Shelby stopped taking donations way before she allegedly received this money, so why did they even go through with this in the first place? But I do want to see if Robert is a man of his word and would actually pull the trigger in spite of his community being visibly unhappy with a decision like this in the first place, and to see where his true colors actually lie regarding his viewpoints on Shelby. I mean, comparing her ban to George Floyd should spell it out for you, but he has unknowingly danced around it historically. Lastly, and just very recently, Shelby was invited onto the LetsRun podcast. It's prefaced as an interview with no limits, but it's way softer than what you would expect given LetsRun has gone out of their way to ask athletes legitimately pressing questions at times. Shelby's answers throughout this thing are really confusing at times as well, because she claims to not have a clue about the technicalities of the very case she tried fighting and spent 6 digits worth of money on for years, yet simultaneously has strong opinions about the bodies that govern an anti-doping to begin with.
It didn't line up from those of a wild boar or your own reference compound. So I guess, how do you explain that?
Yeah, I think this is kind of where I get a little lost as well. Like, I don't know enough about the precursors and all that stuff. I can only say that no, I did not buy any like drugs online or anything like that. I wasn't taking those, what you said, like those things. Yeah, I think it's hard to respond to it because I don't know enough about the science to like really like other than saying like I did not take either of those things. It doesn't seem like it's fair, I guess. I would love to see more accountability for them to get it right. Because if they don't, like the athlete is the only one that's really going to suffer there. But there was no evidence proving that I cheated either. And I believe from my understanding of the science, I don't think the science really like makes sense and proves that I did cheat. When I think if you really dive into the science, at best, it's still like a question mark and it's still controversial. So like,
the most damning part of this podcast to me was that when talking about the burrito excuse, Shelby makes it pretty clear actually that not only was she not a huge believer in this theory, but her wording makes it seem like they simply used it as a cheap, last resort alibi than them actually thinking it could be the reason behind the positive test.
When you read a headline that says athlete blames positive test on burrito, that does sound ridiculous, right? Like it sounds like a really hard thing to believe. I think there's a lot more to the case than just that. But I think you do what you can in the 7 days to provide answers. That was what we the only link that we had was that food truck. And so we did our best to try to prove that. Hey Golfle has levels of nandrolone in it. I ate at a food truck the night before that serves this meat. This is like the only link that we can really find within this time frame. So like, let's do our best to try to prove it.
Lastly, she claims to have talked to Travis Tygart, the head of USADA, and implies that if the case was handled over there, that there was a much better chance that she would have gotten off scot-free. And in recent history with major US track and field athletes, it doesn't surprise me that this would have been the case.
I have talked to them about it. We were in contact with them kind of throughout this, just trying to get other opinions. What we were kind of being told was like, this is not the way that we would have handled this case. The levels that you tested positive at, like, it is a very real possibility that it is contamination. So like what we believe the protocol should have been is you should not have been notified and continued getting tested like 7 times over the next 6 months. There's like I don't remember exactly the protocol, but like that. And then that should tell us if this was a one-time contamination thing or if you're actually cheating.
I mean, they hired an independent arbiter to get Knighton's case heard, and wow, that's weird, he was absolved. But who knows what's gonna happen there. In the comments section of the preview video for this episode, I responded to a comment about someone calling Robert the GOAT for this interview, only for Robert himself to finally admit in a more concise manner for once that he indeed does defend Shelby wholeheartedly. After his abysmal response and another response from me, one of which got auto-deleted when I tried explaining my points, the original commenter actually edited his own thing because they themselves realized how piss poor of a job Robert actually did at this interview. Despite some decent journalistic contributions here and there, Robert Johnson has proven to be a very questionable figurehead in the running media scene at best, and the whole team at LetsRun should feel ashamed about how they approached or continue to approach this entire case in the first place. It makes no sense to me how a media company this popular can coddle a formerly banned athlete to such a comical degree while going out of their way to shame others for virtually the same crimes.
I also think that you should drug test Christian Coleman every single day for the next year. I would do it for the rest of his career. We need to crowdfund this. Every day, drug test this guy for the rest of his career.
They also seem completely naive to a lot of the antics Shelby has pulled up until this point because they did not ask a single unique question whatsoever. They might try to convince you that these other positive cases are far different from Shelby's, but I think by now you realize that this is clearly not the case. LetsRun has gotten away with such piss-poor journalistic and forum managing practices that it boggles my mind that no one has ever addressed it properly. In the words of Carl Lewis towards my last video, do better please.
I now know that I'm super tough and I can like get through shit.
Yeah.
And I kind of feel like at this point, I'm like, I don't know what else you could throw at me that I can't handle.
Now, by this point, you're probably wondering, what do I think Shelby actually did to get banned? Well, I just think she took nandrolone and got caught. It's really not a complicated conclusion to come to. The most referenced theory on what Shelby may have done, though, is when Christiane Ayotte from the Case Decision mentions this oral precursor that is capable of producing similar urine results to Shelby's. However, my mind immediately goes towards injection still, in particular, microdosing, which I'm not going to explain again. I think she probably just mistimed her dose and just got caught off guard, especially since, remember, this was during a time where testing protocols were likely a lot more sparse and inconsistent, so this is a theory I can comfortably subscribe to in the end. I also want to point out that Shelby ran her monster 5,000 meter personal best near the height of this strange era. You have the opportunity of a lifetime to just pound as much volume as you humanly can, and frankly just about have the freedom to abuse whatever substances you want to. Why not take advantage of that in a pre-Olympic year? Speaking of performances, it's kind of funny just how naive people have been to Shelby's improvements as an athlete after college. She graduates ASU in 2016 and somehow goes from a solid 403 1500 meter woman who won an NCAA title to obliterating the American record in 2019 and running one of the fastest 1500 meter times ever seen. Same goes for her 5,000 meter times, where she dropped 26 seconds in a single year and then dropped 10 more off of her own American record during a time trial out of all things. Like, does this improvement rate only stop until you become a multi-time record holder? Now, Shelby is far from the only woman from BTC who's had these large improvements upon signing to them despite already competing at a high level, but this video isn't about them. There is just no sufficient evidence at all to suggest that Shelby is innocent by any metric. The CAS decision has brutally disproven it, the Swiss federal courts threw it out too, there was a great write-up by sports scientist Ross Tucker that confirmed everything pretty well. What is there to argue about at this point? Every defense I've seen for Shelby has either been long-winded hypotheticals that are encased in even more hypotheticals, blatant misinterpretation of data, or exhausting pseudo-intellectual ridden semantics that are so far out of the realm of the subject matter at times that I frankly don't even understand what they are trying to argue at this point. How some people just can't come to the simple and rational conclusion that an elite athlete out of all people simply just got caught taking drugs is beyond me, especially in a sport where you're practically disposable if you can't medal at international championships or win national ones. Tangentially, I came across this comment under the Shelby press conference video, and it brought up some pretty interesting points. Shelby and company quite literally have zero incentive to tell the truth. Not just because Jerry's reputation is on the line or Shelby's, but the entire Bowerman track club would have gotten nuked at this time had Shelby or Jerry displayed even a sliver of admission for their wrongdoing. Doping is an incredibly misunderstood topic when it comes to the general public, so it wouldn't just be the public's perception that matters in the end here, because no sponsor would also even want to touch Bowerman with a 10-foot pole if Shelby admitted to doping. Well, that's not true. Nike has like zero ethics, but besides them, good luck. Does this mean I excuse them for lying then? Of course not. The lengths they went to lie are past the point of just saving face, that it honestly spits in the face of anyone that follows the sport as if they're brain dead. Realistically, Shelby and company should have just shut up from the get-go, especially once her case got completely torn apart.
Even though I can't change anything that's happened, like I do have people that support me, and I'm gonna choose to listen to them and kind of like cancel out the noise.
Now, I might confuse or lose a good amount of people here, but the reason I even invested so much time into this case is not what you think. You also may have noticed that some of the things I've screenshotted are from a time well before this channel's existence even became a thing. There's a few reasons for that. For one, I found this case incredibly fascinating in general. It's unique, it's confusing, and it just turned into something I decided to follow more closely on a whim. 2, once I realized this case was ever evolving, and that Shelby continually kept trying to find ways to weasel the system or to maintain relevance, I decided to start keeping tabs periodically to see if anything interesting would unfold. 3, the amount of parties involved in defending or putting money into this woman was so strange and even egregious for me that I wanted to publicly shame them for it. And 4, the moral and ethical barriers Shelby crossed during her ban have gone so under the radar that they need to be brought to light. Now, some of you might think, but aren't you upset that a cheater is competing again and that she took drugs to get an advantage? Why are you not mentioning that? Because honestly, I don't really care that much. In a world where at least 1 in 3 of the world's best athletes willingly admitted to doping as recent as 2011, the fact that the average doped personal best is nowhere near what the top athletes are running today, the countless cover-ups federations will perform at times to ensure their star runners remain untouched, I can't really say I'm that worried about an athlete microdosing a testosterone derivative that honestly, most of the professional running scene is likely taken already. Don't get me wrong, I am very very against the concept of doping in sports, but do I think she's doing anything to get an advantage per se? Like she's running nearly the same quality of times from when she got banned despite being almost half a decade older now and hasn't gotten caught yet. What do you think that says about the effectiveness of anti-doping tests? I'm not here to turn this into a video about that because if you still want to shame her for doping, that's completely valid. I don't blame you at all. And despite my personal views on doping in sports, I still think it's really weird for major media outlets to be so sympathetic towards a banned athlete. With that said, let me lay out some other things that you should be pretty concerned about too. If you were a huge fan of Shelby, or Bowerman adjacent people involved with the situation, think about how they tried to make you feel like a complete idiot about this case. The way these very accomplished and high-ranking members of a professional team lied countless times and have now extinguished that trust and excitement you had for them when they were a prolific and fun-to-watch distance running team. What about the $16,000 Shelby raised for a case that, again, had no realistic chance of getting resolved at all? In a way, stealing money from her fans while still somehow being able to afford going to altitude camps, traveling the world for someone who was in need of $300,000 at one point. Can you explain to me how she suddenly didn't need to worry about legal fees by as early as October 2022? Oh yeah, in case you didn't know, I did message Shelby posing as a fan years back through GoFundMe's message system, and she told me she wasn't spending money on legal fees by this time frame. So she's saying that within less than a year, she was somehow able to make up this $280,000 deficit while trying to train full-time still, traveling to and training at Flagstaff without a running contract, traveled the country with her boyfriend, but at the same time needed to do DoorDash and pet sit to make ends meet? Make it make sense, please. Or my least favorite, that Shelby likely used an at the time minor's platform to emotionally grieve to and arguably manipulate, and to then selectively use his platform for temporary good PR as she tried to figure out her next move. Then, of course, the countless media outlets and professionals that pampered her and continue to put her on a pedestal despite the morally and ethically questionable things she's done, and that these outlets will likely continue to obsess over her until her career ends. Here's the thing. Shelby owes about $16,000 back to her fans. That's a lot of money, and even if her donors are fine with it, it is the right thing to do in the end. Robert Johnson, or LetsRun in general, owes about $1,700 to Shelby too, but if they have already, has yet to provide proof of transaction to their buyers. And lastly, a brief statement for Jerry Schumacher. You killed the Bowerman Track Club single-handedly. The overwhelmingly nice treatment you, and Shalane as well, provided Shelby post-ban led not just one woman to leave the club, but likely multiple others in the process. Your move to Oregon was realistically just the final nail in the coffin that sent the club plummeting to its death. There is a world where Shelby had just said, yes, I took this substance and that is my fault, which would have made her one of the few athletes who have willingly admitted their mistakes and may have even gained a bit of respect years down the line. Ben Johnson is a shining example of someone who shedded a great amount of light on the systemic nature of doping in elite sports, as he came pretty damn clean about him being a part of that very culture and the corruption surrounding it. Of course, things are a little different now, as this attitude nowadays would most assuredly cost Shelby every connection she has, but in an ideal world, this self-admission and self-awareness would make her a uniquely memorable athlete in my opinion. Instead, we got Shelby trying to hold on to her waning relevancy for 4 years, and now that she's back, she is still not respected by most of the community, not just because she doped, but because she failed to be honest for even a second, and will now forever be remembered as the burrito girl who cheated, instead of the new hero of American middle distance running that many saw in her. Someone who likely inspired thousands and thousands of women and young girls that run around the world. Shelby, one day you will recognize how embarrassing you've truly made your legacy, no matter what you do from here on out. Because even if your piss isn't clean at the end of the day, maybe someday, at least your morals and ethics can be.
It means the same to me every time I come here. Just that it's really an honor to be here.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Congratulations.